Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this community gathering that is presented by Home is Here, where we're going to be talking about the DACA Fifth Circuit decision. So to introduce myself, I'm Iliana Perez, and I proudly serve as the Executive Director of Immigrants Rising. And this work is very personal to me. I was undocumented for 27 years, and I was a DACA recipient before recently adjusting my status. And many of my family members remain undocumented. For those of you that may be new to Immigrants Rising, we empower undocumented people to achieve their educational and career goals through personal, institutional, and policy transformation. And Immigrants Rising is part of the Home is Here coalition, which aims to protect the DACA program. And more broadly, we fight to protect immigrant youth while also building for wins that protect all undocumented people. The Home is Here includes several other organizations such as United We Dream, Make the Road New York, Forward, NACASEC, Justice Action Center, CASA, America's Voice, CHIRLA, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, and NILC. And we know that there are a lot of questions about the DACA case. And today we're joined by experts who are going to be sharing overview about what happened with the DACA case, and we'll be able to answer some questions. And thank you everyone who submitted questions as part of your registration today. And so for today's agenda, we're going to start off with a grounding that is going to be led by my colleague Mayra. There's going to be a DACA decision update that is going to be shared by Josh, a practitioner's update that's going to be shared by Megan. We're going to dive into a Q&A, again, with some of the questions that were shared in the registration, and we're going to wrap up with a closing and resources. I'll start off by introducing our Immigrants Rising team that is here today. We're going to have Denea Joseph with us, who is our National Entrepreneurship Manager, who is going to be moderating the Q&A for today's session. We also have Mayra Barragan-O'Brien, who is our Mental Health Senior Manager, who is going to be leading us in our grounding today. And we're also very happy to have our speakers today who are going to be providing updates about the DACA case, also sharing some information with respect to renewals. And with us, we have Josh Stehlik, who is the Deputy Legal Director with the National Immigration Law Center, also known as NILC. We have Megan Sheffield, who is an immigration lawyer with Sheffield and Harriger PLLC. And we have Nina Perez, who is the Vice President of Litigation with MALDEF. Thank you so much to our speaker for joining us today. There are some disclaimers that I would like to read before we dive into today's conversation. This presentation is intended for informational purposes and should not be considered legal advice. The information that will be shared today will be accurate as of today's date, but may be subject to change thereafter, and encourage you all to keep up to date with all of the latest changes. Unfortunately, today we will not be able to assist you with individual cases. As much as we would love to answer questions about your individual case, unfortunately, we are not able to do that. And we do encourage you to speak to an attorney to discuss your specific situation and explore your legal options. For those of you that may be interested in looking for low-cost or free legal services, we encourage you to visit immigrationlawhelp.org. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Mayra, who is going to lead us on a grounding today.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Iliana. As Iliana mentioned, my name is Mayra, pronouns are she, her, ella in Spanish. I was also undocumented for over 20 years, so the work that I do hits very close to home. And I do what I do because of my lived experience and because I am passionate about wellness. And I have a visualization activity for you today. However, if you're more of a hands-on person, I'm going to invite you to take the next 9 minutes to go and take care of yourself, however that looks like for you. Go and grab your favorite drink, maybe your fidget toys, go light up a candle, bring your favorite blanket, whatever feels right for you. But my intention with this exercise is not to minimize your feelings and experiences by asking you to just breathe. I know that it's so difficult to just breathe when there's just so much going on in our lives. And so what I'm inviting you to do is to acknowledge that even when everything feels out of control, there are many things in your life that you can intentionally choose. And what you choose to carry can be one of them. So I'm going to ask you to sit back and feel as comfortable as you can. Some people feel grounded when their feet are touching the floor. But if you're one of those like me who would rather have both feet on your chair and that feels comfortable, do that. Now I'm going to invite you to take a deep breath. If you feel inclined to close your eyes, do that. But please know that there is no right way to engage in an activity like this. Just breathe. And I'm going to take you on a hike. If you can visualize this, I'm going to invite you to take yourself there. Picture yourself being in this walk. And maybe in there's some grass, some trees. What do you see? Are there any flowers? What color are they? Maybe you see some dandelions. Picture what you may see in this hike. Are there mountains? Is there an ocean nearby? What do you smell? Do you feel this salty breeze touching your face? Picture yourself walking in this road. And as you walk in this road, I just want you to notice. What do you see? What do you feel? What do you hear? Do you hear the waves? Do you hear the birds? Is it cool? And I want you to notice that you're carrying a backpack in this trip. And in this backpack, you're carrying all of your dreams, your feelings, your experiences, your to-do list, your work tasks. And I'm going to invite you to keep walking. Now, I'm asking you to picture a safe. It could be a big safe, like in those movies, in the bank, or it could be a small safe, like those in a hotel room. I want you to notice that you and only you have the ability to open this safe. Take a deep breath. I'm inviting you to open this safe. And I want you to open up your backpack. I want you to take it off of your shoulders and picture yourself opening this backpack. Give it a color, give it a size. And whatever it is that you don't need in this moment, maybe you don't need that feel of anger and frustration at this moment for the next 50 minutes. And I want you to put it in there. Maybe that to-do list that you have at work, you don't need it right now. You don't need it for this trip. Put it in that safe. What is it that's weighing you down that you don't need in this very moment? Put it in that safe. And picture yourself placing those things in, those feelings, those experiences, that to-do list, and close it. Again, only you can open it. Only you have access to this safe. And for the next minute or so, I'm going to stay quiet. And I'm going to invite you to picture yourself being at the end of this hike, at the end of this walk. And I want you to picture what you see when you get there. What do you see? Is it a waterfall? Is it just the end of the road? Is it a cliff? Is it a beautiful view? Just take the next 30 seconds Gonna stay quiet and just picture it. As I invite you to walk back, I'm gonna ask you to picture that safe again. If, and only if you need whatever you put in there for the next 15 minutes. If you need that feeling of anger, if you need that sadness, if you need that to-do list, if you need whatever it is that you put in that safe, I'm gonna ask you to choose to make a choice of putting it back in your backpack and carrying it in your shoulders again. If you do not need it, I'm asking you to choose for this next 50 minutes to walk away from that safe. You can always come back to it. And as you breathe comfortably, I want you to start wiggling your fingers, wiggle your toes, move your neck. If you were closing your eyes, open them when it feels comfortable. Look around you. Look at your computer, look at the people that are here. Start touching what's around. Do you have a mouse? Do you have your cup? Just touch it. And take a deep breath. A collective deep breath. Sometimes that's what we need. Again, breathing is not gonna fix our lives, but it is gonna help our bodies to acknowledge that in this very moment, we are safe. In this very moment, we are here. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this small exercise with you. If you were able to engage in it, great. If you want to come back to it, you're going to get the recording and maybe you can practice some more of these visualizations. For now, I'm going to pass it on to Josh so that Josh can get us started with this conversation.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for having me tonight. My name is Josh Stehlik. I am a Deputy Legal Director at the National Immigration Law Center. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm based in Los Angeles. And I am going to give just a very brief update on the recent Fifth Circuit decision that came down in the Texas-led legal challenge to DACA. For those of you who are not familiar with the National Immigration Law Center, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan national legal advocacy organization that works to advance and defend the rights of low-income immigrants and their families. And we are really fortunate tonight to have with us Nina Perez from MALDEF, who is the Vice President of Litigation. And MALDEF, as you may know, represents DACA recipients in the Texas-led challenge to the legality of DACA. She also gave a kick-ass oral argument before the Fifth Circuit last fall. And so I will definitely be tag teaming this update with her and answering questions with her, given her role in the litigation. Next slide, Iliana. So just to take a step back, refresher, how did the case get back to the Fifth Circuit? So there's a fair amount of litigation, as Nina can attest, that brought us to this place, and a long history of litigation prior to the DACA rule that the Biden administration issued through notice and comment rulemaking in 2022. But in the interest of time, I'm really just going to kind of start from the point at which the Southern District of Texas, Judge Hanen in the Southern District of Texas, ruled on the DACA rule, which was in September of 2023. And Judge Hanen found that the DACA rule is unlawful. And as before, Judge Hanen issued what's called a partial stay or a pause on part of his ruling to allow current DACA recipients to continue to renew their DACA. A month later, in November of 2023, MALDEF, the state of New Jersey, who has also intervened to defend DACA along with MALDEF, and the Biden administration all noticed their appeal of Judge Hanen's ruling on the DACA rule. And then fast forward to last October, October 10th of 2024, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals heard oral argument on the appeal, and Nina was one of the arguers before that three-judge panel. Next slide. So the recent Fifth Circuit decision then is the three-judge Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal panel's decision, for which they heard oral argument last October and issued the decision back in January of this year, January 17th. And the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals found that parts of DACA that go beyond the protection from deportation are unlawful. But there are several nuances to the decision. So just wanted to highlight some of the key takeaways from their decision, which was more nuanced than some of us may have anticipated. So first and foremost, the Fifth Circuit maintained the stay or the pause on part of its ruling, which allows current DACA recipients in every state, including the state of Texas, to continue to be able to renew their DACA. So that is very important. And they actually retained, in my reading of the language, they retained the right to change that stay, or the Supreme Court could, of course, do so as well. But I think based on the language, like Judge Hanen would not be able to necessarily change that stay if the case goes back to Judge Hanen, which we'll talk about. The Fifth Circuit also limited its ruling that parts of DACA are unlawful to Texas only. And that's because the court said that only Texas had ostensibly shown that it was somehow harmed by DACA. And that's a requirement to have what's called standing to bring suit in federal court. So we obviously don't agree that Texas was harmed, but of the suing states, Texas is the only state that ostensibly tried to show that it had been harmed by DACA. And the Fifth Circuit distinguished between DACA recipients' protection from deportation and work authorization, and found that the work authorization piece for DACA recipients is what exceeded executive authority. And want to note that the Fifth Circuit decision has not yet taken effect. So it was issued in January of 17, but it has not gone into effect yet. Next slide. So the big question I'm sure folks are wondering is what comes next? Well, first, there is a potential change in the federal government's position so that it'll no longer be defending the DACA rule as the administration had. I don't know if Nina has an update on this. I have not seen that happen, but we certainly have seen we've seen that happen with other transitions from one administration to another. And so there is at least the possibility that the Trump administration is going to take a different position in terms of defending the DACA rule than the Biden administration had. Even if that were to happen, we still have MALDEF and the state of New Jersey, who represent defendant interveners in the case, or are defending the legality of DACA. So even if the federal government's position shifts, we still have MALDEF and New Jersey in the case defending the legality of DACA. And then the Fifth Circuit, in its decision, ordered the case back to Judge Hanen to potentially sever protection from deportation from work authorization. And the case will go back to Hanen when the remand from the Fifth Circuit issues, which is a complex question in this case. So unfortunately, we can't give you a easy answer on when that remand back to Judge Hanen will happen. And that's because any party to the case can take certain next steps that can impact the timing for the issuance of the mandate. So any party could seek rehearing from the original three-judge panel of the Fifth Circuit, or else could seek what's called en banc review, which is asking all of the active judges on the Fifth Circuit to hear the case, or any party could seek what's called certiorari, which is asking the U.S. Supreme Court to hear the case. And any of those actions could bear on the timing and the issuance of the mandate, which is why we can't give sort of a straightforward, like, single date by which the mandate, by which the mandate would issue. And the mandate is essentially what sends the case back from the Fifth Circuit to Judge Hanen. Do want to save time for questions. I don't know, Iliana, if we're going to do questions now or at the end of the call, but definitely wanted to leave time for questions and just flip to the next slide. This is my contact info. So if you have questions after this, please feel free to reach out to me at my email, which is just my last name at nilc.org. And would imagine Nina would be also available to field questions. And I certainly would be consulting with her on questions that I am unable to answer directly. So don't know, Iliana, if we want to take questions now or at the end.
So we are going to take questions at the end. We're going to do a round of Q&A, but Nina, is there anything else you would like to add?
Yes, I just wanted to add thank you to Josh for doing a lovely job of summarizing some of the intricacies of the DACA case. And I only just wanted to add a couple of overarching points, which is that DACA continues for current recipients. So if you are a current recipient of DACA, or your DACA has expired for less than a year, you are protected in this case. DACA has remained alive for the 6 years that Texas has been trying to get rid of it. And I think that it's really important to just know that even though Texas and some of these other states have been trying to end DACA, it has remained in place, and it is currently in place for current recipients. The case itself has now been limited by the courts just to Texas, which is a really important development because Texas and the other states wanted to end DACA throughout the entire country. And the direction that these court decisions are moving is making the case smaller and smaller. There are still challenges in this lawsuit, and we will continue to fight to preserve DACA and to preserve DACA protections. But I wanted to end as I started with, if you are a current recipient, your DACA does remain in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina. Thank you very much, Josh, as well. At this point, we're going to pass it over to Megan Sheffield, who is going to give us a practitioner's update.
Hi, thank you so much. So yes, my name is Megan Sheffield. I'm an immigration lawyer with my private firm now, but I worked for many years in the nonprofit sector and with many amazing partners doing pop-up DACA clinics throughout the state of Texas. And so I'm really happy to be here with all of you and in such amazing company. So I echo what Josh and Nina said, that DACA is still valid right now, right? So if you have DACA, your DACA is still valid. The status quo remains the same right now, right? Your DACA is valid, the protection is valid, your work authorization remains valid if you have it now. And DACA renewals remain available, right? So anyone who currently has DACA or who has DACA that expired but less than a year ago can still renew. Renewals are being processed, I think, fairly reasonably quickly right now. That could change, as we've seen in the past. Sometimes they'll go really, really quickly and they'll be processed within a matter of weeks. And then sometimes they slow down and it goes many months. So it's sometimes difficult to predict how long they will take, but right now they are being processed fairly quickly. We're seeing renewals in like a month. Of course, it depends on the case. DACA renewals can be processed electronically. They can be filed online, or you can file on paper. I will note that it seems that the electronic filing seemed to go a bit faster. And so if you're close to the expiration of your current DACA, that's an option to potentially consider. I'll also note that it's a bit cheaper. USCIS is giving a $50 discount for online processing. So that may be a good option for that reason as well. I will say that folks who do have complicating factors in their case, it could be a certain criminal history or immigration history that's a little bit complicated. Sometimes the online filing is a little bit more challenging, and I definitely recommend that folks talk to a qualified attorney or accredited rep for assistance with those types of cases. But yes, you can still renew. Currently, USCIS recommends filing renewals, within 120 to 150 days prior to expiration. They will accept early filings, but I will say that especially since they're processing so quickly in most cases right now, it's very possible then that if you file early, your current grant of DACA will be cut short, and then the new grant of DACA unfortunately won't be consecutive. It would start once the renewal is approved. Okay, advance parole also remains available. This is very important. There are risks, of course, with travel on advance parole, but there are also some really important benefits. It's important to note that your DACA work authorization, your DACA grant alone does not give you permission to travel. And if someone travels outside of the United States on DACA, but without previously getting advance parole, then the DACA can be terminated and you may not be able to, or likely will not be able to re-enter the United States. So if for international travel that requires advance parole, to be able to be eligible for advance parole, you must show that your reason for travel is for humanitarian, educational, or employment purposes. And I will note that USCIS recently clarified that traveling for a consular interview abroad for an employment-based visa will count as an employment purpose. And so I know a lot of folks have been able to travel for that reason. But it is important to talk to a lawyer if you are considering applying for advance parole or an accredited rep, and before traveling. So I think there are two key points. One, to have a full legal screening before even applying, to ensure eligibility, to be able to discuss risks and benefits, and then also before traveling. Advance parole applications currently are taking, let's say, around 4 to 7 months to be processed, and a lot can change in a few months. So it's important to have those points of contact with a legal representative both before applying and before traveling. It's also important to know that, unfortunately, advance parole is not a guaranteed entry, right? So even if you are granted advance parole, that is a document to permit entry, but you'll still need to go through the port of entry at the border, whether it's the land border or through the airport, and there could be issues that come up, like, for example, if someone has a prior removal order or a certain criminal history, that could prevent entry. That's why it's really important to have that screening before applying. However, there are some really great benefits to traveling on advance parole. One is obviously to complete the purpose for the travel, right? Whether it's the humanitarian purpose. And a lot of folks have traveled, to visit an ailing relative. Clients travel to seek medical care or dental treatment, right? Or, for educational purposes, for a study abroad, or doing some sort of training abroad, or for their employment reasons. So obviously being able to travel for those reasons is important, but also travel on advance parole gives you a parole entry into this country. It doesn't really have much impact in terms of DACA, but it can impact your future immigration options if you have a way to eventually apply, let's say, for permanent residency through a family member, or for some another path that requires having a lawful entry into the United States. We don't know what's going to happen with advance parole. We'll have to see what happens with the litigation, but also, what the government may do, right? We don't know what executive actions may come. So I do think that folks who think they may have a reason to travel that falls into one of those categories, the humanitarian or the employment or educational, really should reach out and seek legal advice in terms of applying. There are ways to expedite the advance parole application. Even if you've already filed, you have to meet certain criteria to be able to expedite. If you can show that you've filed, your application's been pending, and your departure date when you need to travel is rapidly approaching, you can submit additional evidence to USCIS showing, you'll suffer severe financial loss or there's an emergency that you really need to be able to travel soon. There's also a process called emergency advance parole. And in order to request emergency advance parole, you do that actually in person at a USCIS field office. So it's different from the process where you file through the paper. With USCIS, you make an info pass appointment, still have to fill out the whole application and bring all the evidence, but you have to show why it's an emergency. Typically, that's going to be why you need to travel in the next 2 weeks. Although there's definitely discretion that's applied, and it can differ from field office to field office with USCIS. But that does require going in person, submitting an application, showing your urgent need to travel, and that can be granted the same day. So, I've seen individuals who we've gone to the InfoPass appointment, submitted the application, they get that advance parole granted and are able to travel that same day. And so that can be really beneficial for folks, especially since, we don't know if advance parole will always remain available, to be able to get that travel in sooner rather than later. The last thing I wanted to mention is initial DACA requests. So I do see a lot of misinformation out there about whether or not USCIS is accepting initial applications. They still are. You can file initial DACA application, and this is for individuals who have either never applied for DACA before, or maybe they had DACA but expired a year or more ago, and that way they can't file for a renewal anymore. Unfortunately, under current USCIS policy, they would be considered an initial applicant. So they are still accepting those applications, but that does require submitting all of the evidence to show that you meet the initial DACA criteria, including proving that you've been living here since June 15th, 2007, which is extremely burdensome. However, due to court orders, USCIS is not processing those cases. They're not granting those cases. And there have been many, many applications that are on file and have been just sitting there pending with USCIS for years now. But for some folks, they may decide that it's worth it, but I think it does really, I think it would be really important to do a really thorough consultation with a legal representative to determine if that is the best option for you. And then one other thing that I wanted to mention is that there still are privacy restrictions on the information that's submitted in DACA applications. It's codified in the regulations. I know that there are concerns about, under this current administration, submitting an application again, submitting new information, especially for folks who move to a new address. But in the regulations, there are restrictions on the information that's within the DACA application, that it is not supposed to be used for immigration enforcement actions against the applicant. There are some exceptions, for criminal matters, but that mainly it's going to be criminal and fraud matters, but also the restrictions on the use of that information and those privacy protections also extend to family members of the requesters. Okay, so I think the bottom line, as has been said and probably will continue to be repeated, is DACA is still available for folks who have DACA now and had DACA, but it hasn't expired a year or more ago, right? So renewals remain available. Advance parole remains available. There are risks in traveling in advance parole. As I mentioned, it's not a guaranteed entry, and we don't know what changes may come still under this administration, but it is currently available. But it should be used with caution. And initial applications are still accepted, but unfortunately not being processed. I think that's all I have, unless my co-panelists would like to add.
Thank you very much for all that great information, Megan. The conversation will continue, but first I would like to pass it over to my colleague, Denea Joseph, who is our National Entrepreneurship Manager, who will be moderating our Q&A. So I pass it over to you, Denea.
Thank you so much, Iliana, and thank you so much, Nina, Megan, Josh, for your incredible work for the community. Nina, I definitely want to applaud you for being the Avengers of the DACA recipients in regard to witnessing what I saw in the court. I had the pleasure to be in the court when they were hearing the oral arguments for the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans, and I really felt protected in every way possible. The individuals in the courtroom knew you by name, right? And I saw that the Texas litigants appear as they were shaken in their own boots, as they had no match for the legal prowess that you did in regard to just being armed with information and facts about how our community is really benefiting not just our individual states, but the nation. So I just want to applaud you all collectively for that work. And I'm also a DACA recipient, right? So in addition to this being the work that we do, it's very much personal. And there's a lot of questions, a lot of fear coming from our community, particularly in regard to what comes next in regard to the litigation timeline. So Nina, I really just wanted to put that question to you. What should we anticipate? We know what the decision was in regard to DACA recipients coming from the state of Texas, but what comes next for the collective of those who are impacted by that DACA program?
Thank you, and thank you for the kind words. It feels really personal, and it's a privilege every day to wake up and have the honor to work on this case for DACA recipients and our clients. In terms of what happens next, I don't have a lot of definite things to tell you because some of this is going to depend on how Texas and the anti-DACA states respond to the Fifth Circuit's ruling. So some of this is in our hands. We decide how we're going to respond to the ruling. But what the unknown for us right now is what Texas and the other states are going to do. So what I can tell you is that this case is currently sitting at the Fifth Circuit, which is like the middle level of cases. Down below, we have Judge Hanen in his courtroom in Houston. We're in the middle right now. And up above us is the U.S. Supreme Court. So we don't know right now whether Texas is going to ask the Supreme Court to look at this case. We don't know if Texas is going to ask the full Fifth Circuit, right? Stay in the middle level. We don't know if Texas is going to say, let's go back down to Judge Hanen. So because we don't know exactly what direction we're going to go in, we will know in the next few weeks what Texas decides to do, but we're kind of in a pause period right now to allow the parties to decide what to do. So that sounds very uncertain, but what I want to reiterate is that during this whole process, DACA remains in place. Current recipients can renew. And Megan gave such wonderful advice about, talking with your lawyer and talking with other people about when to renew. But so the certainty is that DACA remains in place. DACA remains renewable. Folks with DACA should renew. You want to take that advance parole? It makes sense to explore that with a lawyer. We can continue with life right now while we're still unsure what direction exactly this case is going to go in. We will know more in a few weeks.
Thank you so much, Nina. And does the same wisdom apply to the DACA recipients from the state of Texas, that they should continue to renew as we see it for regular DACA recipients right now as well?
Thank you so much for asking that question. We get that question a lot. And yes, DACA recipients in Texas are still covered by the full DACA program, should still renew. The DACA recipients in Texas are positioned exactly the same as everybody else. The Fifth Circuit decision is forecasting something different for Texas recipients, but right now in Texas, DACA remains the same, just like it exists outside of Texas.
Thank you so much for that clarification, Nina. And to you, Megan, I wanted to ask the follow-up. You provide us with so much guidance pertaining to DACA renewal and pertaining to advance parole renewal as well, too, for the individuals who are seeking it, whether it be for humanitarian purposes, educational purposes, etc., or work purposes. And so a lot of people go by the conventional wisdom of the 150 days that we had previously been expected to apply, to make sure that it's enough time between, when we're slated to renew and the time frame that USCIS is taking. Is that 150 days still the recommended time frame, or are those who are practitioners recommending much more than the 150 days now?
So that's a good question. I think, I know this is such a lawyer answer, but I think it depends on the case. I will say some cases do have complicating factors, complicating, maybe criminal history or complicated travel history that impacts questions about eligibility, and those cases are going to take longer to process. And so those cases, sometimes it makes sense to file a bit earlier. But I think the general wisdom, given the current state of the litigation, is it's probably fine to go with the USCIS guidance, with the caveat of the 120 to 150 days, with the caveat that we don't know if if the processing will slow down again. We don't know if it will speed up even more. So it's just unfortunately really difficult to know exactly when the best time is to file. Because you could file 150 days out and then your case is approved in 3 weeks and then you've just lost a bunch of time. I know a lot of advocates have really pushed for consecutive grants of DACA, but unfortunately, USCIS has not gone that route yet.
That's extremely helpful, Megan. And I think something else that came up for a lot of folks as well, too, is around the question of like advance parole. Like, is that still something that people are able to safely pursue? Like you said, it's recommended that folks go to an actual attorney who's able to vet their case and see. Have you heard of anyone? I know this came up a lot when I pursued advance parole last year, as to whether or not you had ever heard of a DACA recipient who had advance parole and whether or not they had been refused entry back into the United States.
Good question. I have heard of one, but it was due to a significant criminal issue that had not been disclosed or discussed, but was certainly seen when they were trying to re-enter. So I do think it is really important to get that full screening, right? What are the risks in your case? And the parole entry, when someone is approved for advance parole, they get a parole document that says they are paroled, they are allowed to enter the United States between X date and Y date, right? And it's very important, I should stress this, to only travel within the authorized time period. If you leave early, that could be problematic. If you come back too late, that will most certainly be problematic, right? So it's very important to stick within the entries. But it is also, there's a lot of discretion at the border. You are not guaranteed entry with the advance parole document, which is why I think it's really important to do that legal screening. I don't know anyone personally who has had any problems entering, but I do know of that one case of someone who had a criminal issue that had not been disclosed, and that became a problem. But I think for anyone who thinks they might possibly be eligible for advanced parole, they have some educational program, and it doesn't have to be you're currently enrolled in college and going to go on this like study abroad program that your school does. I've had, folks travel, they found a program that would further their education because they want to study, XYZ in the future, and have been able to travel for those reasons, right? As long as, you're able to argue. So I think you can get creative and the reasons for traveling. And I just want to mention, I saw someone popped up in the chat asking about dental care. Yes, I've had folks travel, to seek dental care, showing that it's exorbitantly expensive here in the United States. And they found, someone who can do it for, something that they can afford in another country. Even with the travel costs, it would be more affordable, and it would not be affordable otherwise. So I think, I think it is it would be helpful to do those consultations now with an attorney or a creditor rep who you trust to review those options.
Thank you so much, Megan, for that guidance. And to you, Josh, I wanted to ask the question that actually came up in our Q&A section. Someone noted earlier that there is a difference between, having the work authorization and being able to have protections from deportation. There's from the documented community, of course, and our entire undocumented community with all of the immigration raids that we've seen most recently. What do these raids mean for members of the documented community right now? And does DACA offer those protections from deportation?
Yes, I didn't catch the very beginning of your question because you cut out a little bit. But if your question is, should DACA protect individuals who are caught up in, say, a community raid, that having DACA should prevent them from being subject to deportation.
That was exactly it. So thank you so much for taking the time to answer that. And what I'm hearing from everyone is thoroughness is important. Being able to be open and honest with your attorney, right? That they should always be privy to all of the details of your case, right? Think of your lawyer as your therapist. They are some people that you could feel free to tell all your chisme to, right? And it would be perfectly okay because you wouldn't want that information to turn around and bite you in the butt, right? And someone else is now asking a question about, in addition to marrying a US citizen, what are the other ways in which someone can pursue citizenship after having done advance parole? For instance, H-1B, what does that process look like? And I'm not sure who wants to take that one.
So I
I'm
will
hoping
speak.
Megan.
Okay. So I can't speak specifically to the H-1B. My firm doesn't handle those cases, but I will say there are other avenues, not just marriage to a U.S. citizen. So, for example, folks who have children who are U.S. citizens who have now turned 21 years old, right? This is actually quite common now that DACA recipients are, the population is getting older, right? More mature. And so many do have children who have turned 21 years old right now. But if they do not have a lawful entry to the United States, like when they originally were brought as a child and didn't come with a visa, or weren't otherwise inspected at the border, there's some serious obstacles in being able to gain residency through a citizen child who's turned 21. And so having travel on advance parole and re-entering, having that parole entry can make that process a lot easier and really viable when it might otherwise not be. So a citizen child who's 21 is married to a permanent resident could be an option too, although it's a little bit trickier. So it really depends. There are different options, sometimes through citizen parents or a permanent resident parents. I think that the issue is for many people to be able to adjust status to become a permanent resident in the United States. For most people, they're going to need to show that they entered the United States, being inspected at a border, entering with parole or with a visa. There are some exceptions. And so for individuals who were brought to the United States without a valid entry, without being inspected by an officer, having that parole entry can really be very significant.
That is incredibly helpful. Thank you for letting us know that there are other avenues to being able to pursue becoming a citizen in the United States. I think that provides a lot of hope for so many people who thought that there weren't other avenues. Something else that is coming up in the chat is pertaining to travel within the United States. As you all know, with everything that is going on with Real ID and the potential implications that it has on immigrant communities in particular, what does that mean for our community and how we must prepare to be able to enter United States airports moving forward? Again, not sure who wants to take that one.
I mean, I will say for DACA recipients, you're eligible to get a driver's license or a state ID, and states are moving towards compliance with Real ID to have those IDs available. And so I think that's key. And this is a good reminder. Occasionally, I do come across folks with DACA who have not gotten a driver's license or a state ID. If that is you, please do so as soon as possible, because I think it's so important to have a state issued document that has nothing to do with your immigration status, but is just a government document that does evidence that you're present lawfully in the United States.
Thank you so much, Megan. Something else that I'm seeing come up as well too, and while we don't want to talk about the potential of DACA going away, I think it's always best to discuss other case scenarios and potential options for our community. And so one of the questions that I'm seeing come up as well too, based on registrants and the questions that they submitted to us to register for today's Zoom event, is around anything that you all are hearing from a state perspective in order to fortify protections for the DACA recipients within their individual states. Have you all been hearing about anything like that?
Well, I'm in Texas, so no, unfortunately. I would love to know that other states are doing a lot better than Texas.
I'm in Texas too, but can speak that there are some other states that have passed laws. Illinois, for example, has something called the Trust Act, which is, not just for DACA recipients, but really helps protect all people who are undocumented. Now, the Illinois Trust Act is under attack right now from the Trump administration, which filed a lawsuit, but the Illinois governor, the Chicago mayor have all made very strong statements that they are going to defend their pro-immigrant policies in Illinois. So I think we're seeing this unfold in live time.
That is amazing to hear. And I love that you said, Megan, I'm in Texas, so I can't speak to anything like that. But it's good to know that there are places like Illinois. Someone also asked, is there any information pertaining to California that you all have heard of? Josh, is
Yes,
there?
California has the California Values Act, which is similar to the Trust Act in Illinois that Nina just referenced. And folks may have seen very recently, Governor Newsom called a special session of the legislature, which allocated $25 million to the state Department of Justice, not the federal, but the California Department of Justice, to fight back against Trump's anti-immigrant policies. So we do expect, I am in California, and do expect to see California to be with other states at the forefront of pushing back against Trump, as we did see under Trump 1.0. Many states, New Jersey, Washington State, California, Hawaii, lots of states that took active roles in opposing Trump's anti-immigrant agenda, and we expect we will see that again under Trump 2.0.
Josh, thank you so much for reminding us that as much as there is so much happening under this administration, that there's actually a lot of pushback, right? And that's something that I don't think gets enough credit. That while all of these things are happening, our community prepared and did a lot of scenario planning for all sorts of circumstances and policies and executive orders that could have potentially taken place, in which we've seen that he hasn't dropped that pen yet, right? That is the most hardest working pen in the United States right now. And I want to end on this note by asking each of you all, as practitioners, as litigants, as individuals who are just spearheading this work, what word of advice would you offer to potential clients or to individuals that you are encountering who are experiencing a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty? What would you tell them as a reminder to just keep the hope alive? And I'll start with you, Nina.
I will say that it has been a long 6 years, but it's not Texas who is going to win this fight. And it's not those other states that have challenged DACA. It is DACA recipients themselves who make extraordinary contributions to this country, to every state and town that they live in. The good and the right is on your side. And we have got your back, and we will do everything we can to support you. And it fulfills us the most when you lead a full life. So please do listen to the advice and make us proud, because we are so proud.
What about you, Josh?
Oh gosh, I don't know how I can follow that up. I mean, that's amazing. I was like, well, those are good words to end with. But I guess I would also think back. I mean, Trump's initial attempt to rescind DACA goes all the way back to September of 2017, and here we are, going on, almost 8 years later with at least DACA recipients still being able to renew. So I don't think I would have predicted at that time, where part of our strategy was fight back to delay this as much as possible. I'm not sure I would have, I'm not sure I would have forecast that we would be, this far out and still at least have DACA available for renewals. So that gives me hope, because when I look back, I felt very, pretty like many of us under Trump 1.0, quite I was quite worried and anxious and disillusioned, and here we are almost 7.5 years later, and the fight, due to folks like Nina and MALDEF and DACA recipients across the movement, have fought back, have shown up repeatedly, and have kept DACA alive for this long. So I feel like in my darkest moments, and I have them here, especially given the last couple of weeks, like I think back to all the fighting that has happened since Trump 1.0 and all that we've accomplished since then.
That's an amazing reminder. And last but certainly not least, what about you, Megan?
Wow. Yeah, I kind of wish we had ended on YouTube, but I will say one thing that's really important: stay informed. There's so much that is changing all the time. There are so many great resources out there that Immigrants Rising is providing, NILC, ILRC. I mean, so many. I think some of the resources are dropped in the chat. So stay informed, know your basic constitutional rights, regardless of all of the other changes that may be happening. Continue to explore whether you may be eligible for another type of more permanent immigration relief. But make sure you're going to reputable sources. And then I would say, don't give up. There are so many of us in this fight together. We're not giving up either, right? And I feel it's so cliche, but we are stronger together. And I don't think we should ever discount our power. I think we just need to harness it and keep fighting together.
Y'all are so powerful. I told y'all, these are the legal avengers that we have of our movement. Thank you all so much for your contributions. And based on the chat, you have folks in tears. So thank you so much for your fight, for your contributions. And I appreciate this conversation so much, not only from a professional standpoint, but as a personal standpoint, as a DACA recipient myself, and for reminding us of the power that we have collectively to be able to fight back, push back, and not only do that, but to win. So thank you so much. And I want to be able to hand it back to Doctora Perez.
Whoops, I just turned my camera off. Sorry, and let me add myself to the spotlight here so that we can wrap things up. But thank you all so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us today for this session. I am also just feeling so good after this session, knowing that there are so many individuals like Nina, like Josh, like Megan, who are fighting for us. And just thank you, everybody. We are in this together. We are resilient. We will thrive regardless of our immigration status, and just encourage everybody to stay connected with us. Follow every single one of our organizations here for updates and information. We will be following up with a recording of this conversation, as well as links to the slides and links to many of the resources that were shared. Thank you so much, Denea, Mayra, Grace, for my team for joining us in this conversation. And stay safe, everyone. Stay hopeful. We're in this together. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.